Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 1023B, and today's date is July 15th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Using Events to Bring Coalition Forces Together for the Next Push in the Middle East. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, today is the Day of Rage, and it's supposed to start in 37 cities in 26 states at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And many people are saying this is a complete hoax. We know that back in 2014, something identical to this was pushed out there and nothing really came of it. But what's very interesting is that the U.S. Army has warned personnel to steer clear of these different locations, avoid being the victims of potential anti-military violence, and don't get involved. So we're going to have to watch this situation very carefully. We will see what happens at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and if it happens the way it happened in 2014 and nothing happens, well, then nobody gets hurt, nobody is sent to the hospital, and we don't have to worry about it. But if something does occur, this is when we have to watch and look very carefully if there are any agent provocateurs, how far they're pushing it, and we have to see what develops from it. So all eyes on what is going to happen later this evening. Now, we understand that the UN, they have a mandate to protect civilians. We went over this in another report. And in Sudan, South Sudan, the UN, their mission there, their mandate was to protect civilians, to defend them by any means necessary. Well, guess what? They didn't do it. They didn't protect the civilians. And the UN continually says they need more troops, but they're not even doing their job. So when we hear this mandate and we hear that the UN is going to protect civilians, they can fire upon anyone that is coming after whoever they're protecting, and they can fire upon those people without permission from anyone, we have to wonder what's really going on here. Because we do have proof that they're not protecting anybody. It looks like the UN is being used as a military force. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the Ukrainian army. They are launching probing attacks in the Donbass region. They're continually firing in different positions. They're probing the strength of the contact line. And every time they do this, they move closer and closer to the rebel lines. So it looks like they're doing this very slowly, very methodically, and they're looking for weakness. And of course, Kerry comes out and urges Russia to accelerate the implementation of the Minsk agreements. If you notice, the United States government central bankers, they always do this. They always push the idea that the other party needs to fulfill the agreement, even though they have been fulfilling the agreement and Kiev is not. And they create this instance where there's nothing left for the other party to do. But they make it look like they need to do something else, while during this time hiding the fact that Kiev hasn't really done what they were supposed to do. And they're never going to fulfill it. And Russia understands this. They realize it. They see what's happening. They're very concerned that Ukraine is prepared and ready for another offensive. And it looks like they're getting ready. So Russia right now, they're deploying their S-400 anti-craft missile system to Crimea in August. Now, this is an advanced system, as we know. They also have the S-500. And this system allows them to shoot down aircrafts, destroy cruise and ballistic missiles, It can also hit ground targets. So we can see right now that Russia, China, and all the other nations, they realize what the United States government central bankers are doing. They're pushing for a major war. And as they move their military assets closer and closer to these countries, Russia and China, they're setting up their defense assets to protect their country. Now, in Iraq, we see Iraqi security forces. They are saying that all these planned protests in the capital city of Baghdad, well, they're unauthorized, illegal, and we will arrest people if you have this protest. Now, the question is, what is this protest? Well, the protest is against the government. They want major reforms, including the replacement of the current cabinet. As we can see, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Libya, in Yemen, the people don't want the puppet governments there. And this is why the U.S. is going to bring in even more troops, because right now, the U.S. military is seeking to bring in additional troops and continually bring in a lot more. They don't want a couple of hundred. They want thousands in Iraq because they see what's happening. The people are rising up. Remember, they need to keep control of the Middle East. If they lose control of the Middle East, especially Iraq, and the people take over, and they kick out the puppet government, they're going to kick out the United States. And once they do this, the U.S. loses control. They lose control of selling the oil using the petrodollar. And they're losing control in Iraq. They're losing control in Lebanon, in Libya, and in Yemen, which means these countries eventually will sell their natural resources not using the dollar. They will use some other currency. And this is what the U.S. doesn't want, because that means other nations will not keep the currency in reserve. That currency, the U.S. dollar, will flow back to the United States, and we will see inflation. And most likely the collapse of the dollar. That's exactly what's going to happen. Now, Turkey, they're having a major problem because they're looking at Syria, saying that we want to make nice with them. And on the other hand, they're saying, no, we're not going to do this. Assad must leave. But today, there's a major problem. We understand that Erdogan is a dictator. The U.S. fully supports him. But we're seeing a coup occur in Turkey today. There are helicopters, military jets flying over the capital. And it looks like the Turkey armed forces say they've taken control of the country. They're going to restore freedom, democracy, get rid of the dictator. And we're going to have to wait to see what occurs at this point. There could be a major civil war inside Turkey. There's also one developing in France. So this is something that we need to watch because things are unfolding very, very quickly. And when we look at the private Western Central Bank countries, they're just ripping themselves and falling apart. The people are sick and tired. And eventually what happens is that people say, you know what? Enough's enough. We can't take this anymore. We know the elite, the central bankers, they want full control. They want to be a dictatorship. They want full control of the people. But the people, again, we're many. They're few. And if we go back in history, we see that this doesn't work. The people will always rise up and remove those types of leaders. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer in certain countries than others, because sometimes there's people, the mass majority, they're sleeping. They don't realize what's happening until it's too late. And then eventually what happens is groups get together, they talk about it, more people join in, and eventually what happens is they push to remove the governments. And we're starting to see this occur. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of this happen in many of the European countries and even here in the United States. Now, as we know, Kerry and Putin, they're having a meeting. And Kerry said to Putin that these diplomatic efforts cannot continue indefinitely. We need something in the near term, something concrete. Now, Russia continually says to the U.S., listen, join us in fighting terrorism. All we have to do is separate the moderate rebels from al-Nusra and al-Qaeda. It's that simple. And then we can go off and fight these terrorists, and you can leave Syria. It's not a big deal. But again, the United States government central bankers, they don't want this. The Pentagon came out and they admitted they did not kill the ISIS commander in March, Shishani. And we realize the U.S. government central bankers, they continually come out and they continually tell you how many commanders they killed. And then later on, they tell you they killed them again. Later on, they tell you they killed them once more. And this is all they have because they're really not killing anybody. But they're just trying to put these stories into the news saying, look, we're doing something. Look, we're actually hitting the commanders. But realistically, the commanders are taking orders from the U.S. government central bankers. And the only reason they got around to confirming that this commander wasn't killed in March is that they think they killed him again this week. And the story was getting very confusing about what they're doing here. It looks like they're not following the script anymore. They're just going off and they're losing track of who they're killing and who they're not killing because they're not killing anybody. Now, there's a warning coming out from the FBI and DHS about violence and terror at the Republican National Convention. And U.S. Homeland Security Jay Johnson and FBI Director James Comey, they both told Congress that they are extremely concerned about this. And what they're concerned about is not the Islamic State, it's domestic terrorism. They're just continually hammering that home, domestic terrorism. Why is that? Because they realize as everything continually falls apart, I mean, we're seeing a coup d'etat in Turkey right now. So you realize and you understand, once the people are sick and tired of the current system, people rise up. When it happens is immaterial because eventually you push people to the point where they can't take it anymore. They will rise up. And this is what they're nervous about because when the collapse comes, they're worried about people rising up. But we can see that the U.S. government central bankers, they're trying to get the European nations together, the coalition forces together for some type of offensive or mission in Syria. And in Nice, France, we see there was a man, Mohamed Boulel, who was driving this large truck, plowed through 84 people, killed them, during Bastille Day. And we realize that Bastille Day is a national holiday in France, and it commemorates the storming of the Bastille in 1789. This is an important event in Paris in the French Revolution. And we can see right now they removed the government at that time. And this happened on this day. Did it send a message? Don't try it? Maybe. But we can see there's many different agendas associated with this. Now, the police found a second ID card in the truck. And it's being reported that this truck was rented about 2 or 3 days ahead of time. And it's also being reported that the truck's windshield and side glass windows, they were replaced with bulletproof windows. And they're saying that the glass did not shatter. The bullets scattered across the windshield. And the driver who was driving was safe. And we know a lot of these events are false flags. We realize this. And we can see that this one is being used to enact more laws, take away the rights of the people, bring more boots onto the ground in France, and push the agenda in Syria. And it's also being used to bring the coalition forces together. Now, during this time period, Hollande was going to lift the state of emergency and saying, we don't need it at this point. Now, all of a sudden, the state of emergency has been extended for 3 months. I mean, when we look at this, this was completely planned. And what we're seeing right now is that there are a lot of protests, a lot of people unhappy with the government in France. And right now, they're calling up 10,000 reservists to patrol the streets of France. We're also seeing they want to bring in more advanced weaponry to internal forces, army grade. So we can see right now they're planning and preparing for riots, for maybe a run at the government, like that's happening in Turkey right now. And they want more weapons on the streets to stop this. Now, John Kerry was out there saying that the Nice attacks show a growing need for action to stamp out terrorism, particularly in Syria. So Hollande came out and says, okay, France now plans to increase the intensity of strikes in Iraq and Syria after what just happened here in our country. So when we're looking at this entire thing, we can see that this is being used to bring in more military assets, send more troops to Iraq and Syria, explain why they're building the base in Syria, have an explanation why the Charles de Gaulle will be sailing to Syria at the end of the summer. And the U.S. is going to be out there saying, listen, coalition forces, look what just happened here. This can happen to you next. We need to stand together to fight the Islamic State, really go after Assad, but they'll use that story. And we can see how this is building up right now. We see the State Department, they released the 28 pages, which say absolutely nothing. And it's a bunch of nonsense that they threw this in front of us, saying that it was Saudi Arabia and they acted alone. And we know this is completely impossible. And much of the report is redacted. And first of all, why would we believe the government at this point that they're telling us the truth and it's in these 28 pages? I mean, if Saudi Arabia wanted to do something, why would they take down the World Trade Center? What would be their motive to do this? Remember, they've grown very rich on the petrodollar arrangement. They have made a lot of money off of the U.S. Saudi Arabia is a major creditor to the U.S. government. If Saudi Arabia really wanted to hurt the United States, well, they don't need to fly airplanes into skyscrapers. All they have to do is ask for their money back all at once. The resulting damage would be to the U.S. financial system, would make 9/11 look like nothing compared to what they could do. So if we believe the official story, and they're telling us that it's Saudi Arabia, why did we go into Afghanistan? Why did we go into Iraq? Are they lying now? Or did they lie then? Or are they just continually lying all the time? Well, I'm going to be going with they're lying all the time. Now, we have an update of what is going on in Turkey, and the military looks like they've taken full control. They're declaring martial law in Turkey right now. and we're going to have to follow this very closely over the weekend. I will give an update on what is really going on in Turkey, but we can see the coup d'etat has succeeded at this point, and we'll have to see what happens going forward. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.